Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be back in Charlotte. If you travel semi-professionally like I do, whenever you land at an airport, whether you want to or not, the memories of previous visits there kind of come flooding back. And sometimes memories are bad and you want to turn on the plane and get out of there. That's not the case here. I was thinking about 1994, the Final Four here. In my younger, wilder, more idiotic days, back in the days before every cell phone had a camera and before Twitter existed, and I had a really, really fun week here back in 1994. So if there's anyone I didn't buy a shot for that week, it means you were too young to be out and about in 1994. So, and I know what it is. The hospitality has always been very genuine, very real in this state, all around the state. I was thinking about other memories here, and again, in younger, wilder days, I celebrated a birthday on stage with the band Hootie and the Blowfish. Any South Carolina Gamecock fans here? I wasn't trying to. They dragged me out. We did a tequila shot on stage, again with the shots, and that's the last alcohol-related story we'll have. But and then got in someone's vehicle. I was still sober. Nobody else was, and there was Dan Patrick and Charles Barkley. It was kind of this extended group that was there for the Jimmy V Foundation concert. And a Carolina flash flood hit that night. And some of you probably have experienced that. And there was a black as night river flowing across the road, which this Yankee didn't see and wasn't aware of that could even happen down here. And I was driving somebody's brand new SUV, went right into a river flowing across the road, killed the engine like that. I mean, killed it for good, killed it forever. And we were stuck in the middle of the woods, not too far from Cary, the Cary-Raleigh area. And all of a sudden, out of the darkness came people towards the car. And I'm thinking, I'm from New York, so this is a little dicey. And they could have taken anything from us because no one was in a position to defend themselves in that state. But they couldn't have been nicer, got us back on the road, called a tow truck, and all ended well that night. So there have been some moments here, like I said, in younger, single, carefree days that bring back good memories. Not too many years after the Final Four, or before the Final Four, I was doing sidelines at Carter Finley. Do they still have that grass bank in the end zone that people kind of sit up there? I was a sideline guy, kind of the Cub reporter, and I was doing a report on how people were enjoying the game from the end zone, and became aware of a guy right to my left. He was just a little in my space. And I was trying to focus on the camera. I was very young, hadn't done a lot of live TV at the time, so it was all I could do to focus on the camera and get my point across. And this dude was just right up here. And so I figured he was now in the shot. So I would just give him a little gentle nudge and just kind of move him out. But it was a bank, it was a grass bank, and he kind of stumbled backwards, fell over people who were sitting on the ground on their blanket trying to watch the game, and went tumbling down the hill. I'm kind of seeing this out of the corner of my eye. So now I'm trying to get through the rest of the spiel, because I suspect I haven't seen the last of this guy. And I was right. As I was wrapping up, I just began to feel a tug. My left leg began to slide down the hill. This dude had crawled back up, and now he was not in a good mood anymore. And it was trying to pull me down. I threw to the booth, and they got me off camera before I was maimed. But I don't know why. I haven't thought about that in many years, but somehow being back in Carolina made me think of getting tackled at Carter Finley. By the way, are there Wolfpack fans here? A few? 3 starting quarterbacks on Sunday, NC State grads, with Glennon getting his chance to take over for Josh Freeman. So that's only happened rarely in the history of the sport. Only one other time has a program had more than 3 starting quarterbacks on a given Sunday, and that was USC a few years ago. So Wolfpack not scoring a ton of points this year, but you can take pride in what you see on Sunday, because that is kind of a big deal. This is a very respectable crowd, well-dressed, well-behaved. I'm not used to this kind of thing on Saturday morning. All right. If you know what College Game Day is, I gave you a brief taste of it. They're usually body-painted, shirtless, hungover, half in the bag, sleep-deprived, 5-hour energy drinking, screaming maniacs who show up to show the world what they're what their program is about. And they don't show up to look at the back of our heads as much as they do, but there's a reason. We don't have a teleprompter, but we do have a safety net behind us there, because it had everything from beer cans to real footballs to Nerf footballs to radishes to Titleists, which have been lobbed from like deep center field. So we are well protected. If you didn't know that from watching the show, we don't put our back to 10,000 lunatics without some kind of a safety net. But it's nice to work without a net in front of you people. If I'm facing you now, so if something comes flying up here, I'm going to be well aware of it. I took a crazy journey to get into this business. I did not get this job because of athletic ability, thank God, because I was average at best athlete in track and basketball until we went up against bigger schools with more diverse student bodies, and I was less than average. So thankfully, I didn't have to be a good athlete to get this gig, but I was a sportscaster geek from about 10, 11 years old. And I was the kind of geek that would turn down the volume on TV and announce games and imagine myself doing that job. Taylor can maybe relate to that. I mean, a lot of us figured out early we were not going to make a living playing sports, but we got excited talking about it. And neither of my parents were sports fans. So my grandmother and her passion and love for Chicago Cubs baseball is what got me into this. I grew up in Illinois outside of Chicago, and I would get dropped off at my grandparents' house on weekends, and she would sit out behind their apartment building in a folding chair with a scorebook, a baseball scorebook. There might be a few people here old enough to know what a baseball scorebook is, but there was a day when you actually used to write down by hand what happened batter by batter, and she used to do that every single game. And the Cubs were not good. I mean, I learned how to be a fan of a bad team at about a 6 or 7 year old, because they were terrible. But there she was every day listening on the transistor radio and scoring in a scorebook. And through her, I figured out a passion for sports and listening to games on the radio and hearing the excitement in the old Chicago Stadium when the Bulls or the Blackhawks did something great and the organ began playing. And I figured what a great job that would be to be able to convey that kind of excitement, that kind of genuine excitement to people, and just sort of did every geeky, odd job you could do from high school on to try to get myself positioned. Gave up a lot of social nights, Fridays and Saturdays, potential girlfriends in Boulder, Colorado, one of the great social campuses in this country, one of the worst football programs in the world when I was there, keeping stats in an IBM Selectric in the pre-computer days. I am that old, yes. I've been doing game day longer than the current players have been alive. I might pause to dab a tear now. That is quite sobering to think about that, but 24 years ago. So, yeah, back in the days when I was at CU, there were no computers. So I had to sit there in an IBM Selectric and keep stats for the worst team in the world and give up all my time with the idea that maybe it would pay off. Maybe I could make a contact and it would pay off down the line. And thankfully, ESPN called a year out of school. And I got to do a high school sports show and meet people like Emmitt Smith, who was the very first football player we profiled at Pensacola Escambia, and now he's a Hall of Famer, and Alonzo Mourning and Lance Armstrong, guys that I actually kept in touch with and became friends with back in the days when I looked 11 years old out of college and was stopped for hall passes as we were there trying to do stories on high school kids who actually needed them. And it's been a fun journey, and I always say to anybody in any walk of life, but especially people who want to do this, be prepared to follow your gut and make unconventional choices, because you never know which path life is going to lead you. And that includes a business like this where people would have told me, don't go to some cable operation in Connecticut, which is 7 years old, which nobody's watching, doesn't really have big-time sports yet, and go do a high school sports show. You got to be kidding me. That's a ludicrous thing to do out of school. You should go read scores at a local market, work your way up, take the conventional path. And I went to ESPN not because I was wise or smart or knew what it was going to become, because I sure didn't, but just it seemed right. It felt right. It felt fun. It felt enjoyable. And I think if we make choices in life based on that and not about the logical, most lucrative, most obvious path, I think we'll do very well. I mean, there's a lot of very smart business people in this room I got a chance to talk to. That makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't have actually stayed in college football, or God knows I wouldn't have stayed in tennis if you cared about doing sports that are highly watched or you're going to be well paid at, because tennis is way down in the pecking order, but I do love it as much as I love college football. Early on, I saw the power of sports to unify us and to bring us together. Of course, it can divide us. You got the red team and the blue team. You got got ways where people get after each other. Jay and his wife down here are on the opposite sides of the Ole Miss Alabama equation this week, so you can watch in separate rooms, and it'll divide you for a few hours. But the way that sports unifies us, I think, are much more powerful and much more important than the ways in which they divide us. And that consistently moves me when I travel around and I see a sport like college football, which I think is particularly social. It's a social touchstone. It brings people together. It lets them yell with one common voice for a few hours. It gives them a reason to be proud about their school or their town or their state. And that is so powerful. And to see that play out behind us every week in College Game Day is such a privilege. And that can happen in all different kinds of ways. People ask me, what's the most important or meaningful College Game Day you've done? And it isn't the place we've had the biggest party or the largest crowd. I think of times where we've been fortunate enough to document the power of sports to galvanize and even heal and make you forget and help you escape for a few hours. And we took our show to Virginia Tech for the season opener in 2008. And it was the first football game after the tragic campus shootings the previous spring. And people on that campus had come together in vigils to grieve and to mourn at the appropriate time and place. But they hadn't come together for a football game yet. They hadn't come together to cheer together as one, as Hokies. And a football game, a few hours in Lane Stadium, wasn't going to help heal the agony they'd been through. But it was a chance to come together and express collectively what it meant to be a part of that family. And so College Game Day was there to document that, to do our best to do it justice. And we took that responsibility really deeply, and the game was unimportant. What was important was capturing the emotions and the feelings on that campus. So we did the first part of the show outside. Then we moved the second half of the show inside Lane Stadium, where the crowd had moved in and they were beginning to get revved up, and it all built toward the Enter Sandman by Metallica. There may be another fellow Metallica fan in here, by the way, or at least Hokie fans that knows the song that they come out of the tunnel to. It's very inspiring. It's one of the coolest entrances. And to have 2 hours of television build to that, where they could just release and be fans and be Hokies, was amazing. And we were so proud that the reaction we got afterward from people there was what we'd hoped for, that we had done that story justice. And we're just a goofy little pregame show on Saturday morning, but you got a sense that setting the table for a football game that morning could do something powerful. The next year we were at the Air Force Academy to pay tribute to veterans, and Air Force was playing Army. We try to do something like that every year, but this year was different. This was in 2009, and it was the same week that there had been the shootings at Fort Hood. And you had soldiers there standing shoulder to shoulder with cadets from the Air Force Academy. And the brotherhood that is always expressed at those Service Academy games, if you're lucky enough to witness one, it's a very special feeling because you see that they are, to put it in a pithy way, they're all on the same team. They'll be fighting a common mission. They want like hell to beat each other in that day, but there's a brotherhood that is unspoken that goes way beyond football. It was even more powerful that day. And I still get chills thinking about our show at the Air Force Academy, which was closed off to civilians that day because they couldn't be sure about security. In the wake of that tragedy, they closed the base off. So we had an audience of only Air Force cadets and some Army personnel who were up there and some families. And so it was a very poignant moment. And we talked about what it meant for them to be together and what it meant for us to be able to pay tribute to them and express our sorrow for what they'd gone through, what they were feeling, and their appreciation for the mission they were about to go perform together in the coming years. And we had a flyover of jets on the Air Force Academy kind of silently approaching overhead and zooming overhead for about 30 seconds. We didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. You couldn't add to the scene. And I still get chills thinking about that. Now, thankfully, it's not that every week. I mean, we typically have crazy LSU fans tailgating behind us and cooking up gumbo and etouffee and whatever they cook in Athens, Georgia, and what they cook in Big Ten country. And that for us is our main mission every week, is just celebrating college football. But I've seen firsthand the power that it has to bring people together. We were just up in Fargo, North Dakota, and they are the Alabama of the FCS, the Division I AA. They're two-time defending national champs. and they're the unanimous #1 team, and they don't care that they're on the edge of our radar screen most of the time. That nobody could name the mascot for Fargo. You don't think you can get there. You only know about the movie and the wood chipper and the funny accent. And we had the wood chipper there too because, we like a good visual joke as well. But what you get is a whole bunch of people every bit as passionate and engaged and invested in their program as they are in Tuscaloosa or Columbus or Athens or Columbia or Clemson. I mean, they were fired up. We shut down the middle of Main Street, and we had a 3-hour infomercial for their program, and they loved it. And it was so flattering and humbling, again, to see the people will use your show to show the world what their program is all about and why it's a great place to be there on game day. And it's such a privilege to be able to do that every week. And I send my best wishes to the entire game day crew. I guess Mr. Pollock was here last year, and you had to listen to his ramblings. One too many shots to the head at Georgia with the Bengals, but he's come along and been a great addition to our team. But everybody says hello, and everyone knows about the Charlotte Touchdown Club. This group has a great reputation nationally, and I salute John for doing this for 20 years, he told me. 20 freaking years. Congratulations. I mean, he's the Frank Beamer of this gig. I would imagine the stress, the headaches, all the things you deal with. It's about like running any big organization. It's hard to do that for 20 years, but I think the work has paid off. And the list of speakers that's been through here, they're big shoes to fill. They've gone and they spread the word about what a great mission this club carries out every year. Stepping in recent years, I'm told, to help save sports at the junior high level. That's just a phenomenal mission to be a part of, and the scholarships and supporting high school sports. So I salute you and thank you very much for supporting the Touchdown Club, because as I said, it has a national reputation and does great work. I was talking with Jay, and I really appreciate Electrolux and Greenville for sponsoring this. Jay said he's an Alabama fan. And so, as I would ask any Alabama fan that I come across, how long have you been a fan? Way back since 2009? Did you jump on the bandwagon then?
I married into it.
Yeah, he said you married into it. And I think that I think there's a lot of new Alabama fans, new Oregon fans around the country. But I appreciate Ole Miss and Alabama. I mean, that is a game this week that will divide families down there. But what Alabama is doing, by the way, is truly remarkable. I didn't think I'd see it in my time. A dynasty on the way to being built the way they're doing it. I mean, I was still covering this sport in the mid-'90s in Nebraska when Tom Osborne was winning 3 out of 4 years. But it's not supposed to be possible to do in the BCS era what Alabama is in the process of trying to do. Doesn't mean you should take it for granted. And they've had a lot of luck to get it done. If Oregon and K-State don't lose late last year, Bama's not in a position to go play for the title. You know that. I mean, some things had to happen, just as they have it happen for Florida. You have to get some lucky breaks to be in a position sometimes. And once they got there, they knew what to do with their lucky break. And it's remarkable to see it unfold every week. And there's a slim margin for error, obviously, in the SEC. And Bama will continue to be challenged, and they can't slip up and bring I don't think they can bring the B- game to beat Ole Miss at home, even though they're a big favorite. I think you got to watch out for a lot of teams, because in that league, it's easy to stumble. But we're watching something unfold that I didn't think I'd see, and that's Alabama try to do something which is be absolutely remarkable to three-peat and win 4 out of 5. And that's where we are right now. I think there's still this sort of march toward the inevitable. I hope, for the sake of this sport, that a team like Clemson or Florida State arrive at that showdown up the road, down the road, close by, both undefeated. Because I can promise you, game day will be back at Clemson, where we had a phenomenal time to start the season when Georgia was in there. And if those teams are both undefeated, that'll be the kind of national showcase game that the ACC needs. I think this conference is on the uptick in football. I really do. But I think the ways that you prove that are twofold. One, at the top, you got to have teams contend for the national title. So Clemson, I think, is for real. We all know what the history is, even especially Clemson fans in here. Who are the Clemson fans in here? Yeah. Well, thanks for taking good care of us. We had a blast a few weeks ago, but you know the whole thing, Clemsoning. You know that there's going to be a slip-up, a potential slip-up against a team you're not supposed to lose to. So, Kirk, we're looking at the camera and implore them not to take somebody lightly. And if they arrive undefeated and the Noles get there undefeated, that'll be the kind of game I think that will have everybody, no matter what region they live in, paying attention to ACC football. And Miami being on the uptick, the win over the Gators, even though they didn't outplay Florida, they didn't outstat them, they found a way to get it done, and that's a milestone win. So Miami being on the way back helps. I think that the depth in the conference is important too. That's the other way you judge a conference. And the ACC isn't where the SEC is in depth. The middle of the pack team's not going to compete on even terms right now. But having teams like Maryland get off to a good start. And I think Carolina and NC State can both turn it around. I think that you look at the schedule, there's not a game on there that's not winnable. The Tar Heels, I was surprised. I did expect them to beat Georgia Tech, to blow a lead, to lose that road game, to lose a conference game. It's a little bit painful in that fashion. You have like a 4-inch putt to get back to 500 this week. They're struggling. So Tar Heels have to win this game. And I think if you look forward, there's not a single game you say that isn't winnable. It doesn't mean they're going to win them all. But I think the same thing with NC State. I think that both programs have very good new hires, coaches that are building their programs, and I think that we'll have those teams very much in the mix in the ACC in the years to come. Because the good thing about the ACC, when you're trying to get there and contend from a middle-of-the-pack position or get from the bottom to the middle, is that it isn't the SEC in that respect. You can do it by turning it around with a couple recruiting classes and then developing those players, and I think you can rise in prominence within the conference. It's not quite the murderer's row that the teams face in the SEC, the perpetual uphill fight a lot of places will face in that league. It's not quite present in the ACC. That's the good news. So I think both programs are not that far away from contending and being right there very much in the mix. I want to leave time for questions because I think that people might have some questions about game day or tennis or anything else, but I do want to confess that my passion for sports goes well beyond this, and you didn't think I was going to talk about figure skating here, but you're not bursting into applause at the mention of figure skating either, but I think it goes to show, and maybe you can relate, if you watch the Olympics or you are affected by sports, you don't have to be a fan of that team to be moved. And I was just talking with my wife about this last night, and we went to the Olympics in Salt Lake City, and she is a huge skating fan. And I was husband of the month at least, if not husband of the year, for getting front row tickets for the ladies' long figure skating program, which where the gold medals are handed out in the Salt Lake Games. And I didn't know any of them other than I knew Michelle Kwan, and it was supposed to be her year, but I sure didn't know who Sarah Hughes was walking in there that night. And I think what's so great about sports at any level, any sport, is the potential for unscripted drama and the idea that you never know what you're going to see when you tune in. And that's part of that shared experience. And that's what makes going to a game different than going to a play or seeing a movie or even a concert where bands play a set list and one show is pretty much like the next. When you go to a sporting event, none of us know what we're going to see. We could see something we'll never forget. We could walk out of there, hopefully we've all had that feeling. You walk out of a stadium or an arena feeling like, man, I just saw something that blows my mind that I'll never see before. And that's what I felt at the Olympic figure skating. I walked out of there after watching Sarah Hughes, a girl from Long Island, go out there and skate the performance she'd always dreamed about from when she was that tall and wasn't expected to do it. Wasn't anywhere near a gold medal contender. But all the other women bobbled or succumbed to the pressure, and I have massive respect for Olympic sports. Anybody that does a sport where you wait 4 years to have that big stage, and one bogey and it's over, one stumble in gymnastics or skating, you choke just a little bit, and your dream is finished, and you might not get another Olympics to get back there, and if you do, you got to wait 4 years for it. I'm blown away by athletes who perform under pressure like that. And this 16-year-old from Long Island went out there and skated a flawless program. She could not have imagined it doing any better, and stands it up, and here come the flowers, and here come the applause, and I look over at my wife, and I'm trying not to make sure nobody else can see me because I'm choked up. I got tears in my eyes. I'm trying not to. I mean, you're not supposed to cry at figure skating. You're a guy that immediate man card revocation for getting teared up watching figure skating. But hey, eventually I just started bawling. I thought it was so powerful and so moving, and I think it still is. I think to have people on their feet expressing joy together like that, is something very powerful. And when you see someone achieve their dream in front of you and realize that, it's very, very powerful. So I hope that if you don't have that experience at the Panthers games, this year or in the near future, I hope you will somewhere, some way, because I think that's why I do this. That's why I've been lucky enough to kind of follow my heart, and that's you kind of wait for those moments and wait for be the one that's lucky enough to describe that to people and convey that and hope that somebody out there connects with that. So I do want to allow, they told me to please allow time for questions, and you might be too shy to raise your hand. If you are, that's okay, but I definitely don't want to leave here. Charlotte's so interesting because there's so many fans of different teams and such a great melting pot of different interests. It's one of the unique, cool sports cities in America, I think, for that reason. So I know there's fans of lots of different teams, and people might have questions, so I'll throw it open. Yes, sir.
What do you think will come of all of the things in college football right now with the players, writing different things on their tape? The NCAA now addressing the issue about, where that's going right now.
Anybody follow Jay Billis on Twitter? He's got a lot of followers. I mean, Jay is a colleague and a very good friend of mine and a smart guy and a lawyer. So he has a grasp of the legal ramifications of players owning their signatures or playing for pay in a way that I will obviously never understand. And a lot of smart people have opinions on this. This is the hot button issue right now. We talked about it on game day. We didn't solve anything at all. Guys yelled at each other for about 5 minutes. Paul Feinbaum and Desmond Howard, who had very different points of view, went back and forth, and in the end they hugged it out. But it was feisty for a while, which is good because the debate is feisty. Jay was on a rampage on Twitter this morning because the Big Ten commissioner was saying that athletes get a lot out of college, and if they don't want to play college sports, go play semi-pro sports, and we should have maybe developmental leagues for college football, or football, I should say, skipping college, get them ready for the NFL. If they don't want to abide by the rules in college football, screw them. Go to a developmental league. That's kind of a hardline approach, and I don't subscribe to that. But I think the argument is so big, you got to kind of divide it up into parts. Should athletes be better compensated? Should they get a stipend, or should they get full cost of attendance? Should their parents be allowed to travel and see them play? Yes, I think so. There's too much money involved. Coaches make a fortune. They're mercenaries. They pop around and change jobs. So I think that you should let the players, I wouldn't phrase it sharing the benefits of it, because I don't think you can tie their payment to revenues in such a way as, this player makes more because he's at this school where the revenues are higher and this guy doesn't go. I mean, that's not workable. I don't think that's workable at all. But I think you should give them the full cost of attendance, which would mean $500 or $600 a month extra on top of the Pell Grant money that a lot of guys already get. And I think that would be fair. Now, that's not saying open the market and pay them whatever. And that's the problem I have with guys owning their signatures. People pay a lot more for Johnny Manziel than they do my picture, and they should. But you notice I asked Manziel, this will change your life in ways you can't even imagine. Little did he know, a month later he'd be in a room and people would be paying him money to sign stuff, and that would get him in hot water. I know he says he didn't do it, but I didn't sign that for free either, so I mean, it's just business. So, should Johnny be allowed to do that? I mean, should A&M be allowed to sell number 2 jerseys? Which they did about 4 minutes after he started doing good things on the football field. Should A&M be allowed to take him around on private planes to pose for photos and sign stuff with the Heisman Trophy? Not the school itself. They say they only did that a handful of times. But I said this on game day. Groups associated with A&M that he couldn't say no to, and his coach couldn't say no to, had Johnny running all over the place in Texas, shaking hands, meeting and greeting, and guys would tell him, "Oh, you sure didn't come cheap, Johnny," after a couple drinks. And so he knew what was going on, and so he felt exploited, and I understand that. But all the smart people in this room, all you smart businessmen, we could solve this right now. If you could raise your hand and tell me a way for this to be workable. Because if you allow a player to sell his autograph, it goes way beyond just the Manziels or the Clowneys or a few other guys that may or may not have signed a few things that you can find on eBay. That's right. I mean, shock of shocks, Johnny wasn't the only guy to do things like that, and that's why I think they pulled back too. They knew it was the tip of the iceberg. There was no way to prove it, no way to govern it, and it's just a huge, huge, huge issue. But let's say this booster club for fill-in-the-blank school can now hold legalized autograph sessions. And you throw open this beautiful free market economy that we all love and live with, you throw that open, what's to stop that from serving as funneling cash to players? In other words, this booster loves this guy, this recruit who's a 3-star guard from just up the road. You know, I'm a big enough fan that I'll still pay $1,000 for your autograph, and so will my friends, and we'll do it 2-3 times a year. Now, if that's legal, and I understand the players wanting to get, if that's legal, how do you avoid that becoming just legalized funneling of cash to players? How are you going to regulate the open market in such a way that where it makes sense? I mean, again, if smart people have other ideas, you could give it to them after they leave, I suppose, if you could regulate it. But I think once a player leaves, he shouldn't be exploited. You know, Johnny Manziel shouldn't go back to College Station in a few years and see them selling number 2 jerseys. Now that he's out of school, he should, to some degree, whatever is possible, and again, I'm no lawyer, own his image and likeness in that way and be compensated once his eligibility is up. I just don't know how to do it now without throwing up the floodgates. And I've asked a bunch of coaches, and nobody has really found a way to do it. Now imagine if you could make money off your jerseys and your autograph. You think guys wouldn't look at the stats? You think guys wouldn't have something to say to a coach? Why are you throwing the ball to that guy and not to me? He's scoring touchdowns. They're selling his jersey, not my jersey. Or the right tackle who protects the quarterback's blind side. Hey, Johnny, guess who's got your back over here? How about a little something for the effort? I mean, those kind of conversations, they're not that hypothetical. That kind of stuff could happen if guys are allowed to own and sell merchandise and signatures. And I don't know. I mean, that'd be a coaching nightmare. Think about coaching a team where the market just runs rampant, and a guy's value is determined by how many touchdowns, how many carries, how many catches. Good luck coaching that group. So, I mean, I think that there needs to be more fairness in the system, but I haven't been told a way where it's workable. Yes, sir. How's that for a long answer?
On the heels of your skating story, which you obviously attended as an attendee, through the course of your entire life, either as calling the game, being on the sidelines of the game, or just being in the audience, what is the most amazing sports moment you've ever experienced?
That's a very good question. Most amazing sports moment, just attending as a fan, you mean? I mean, it's never the same. When you're calling something, your brain is there. You're not drinking a beer, hopefully. I mean, the experience is totally different when you're working for just being a fan. And for me, I would say watching the Olympics, watching teams that I care about. I was a Bulls fan growing up outside of Chicago, so being able to watch Michael Jordan hit shots and win championships was just phenomenal. I mean, a lot of us in this room probably have been excited watching Jordan do something, but I mean, those kind of moments, matches that I've been a fan at, tennis matches that I wasn't calling, when Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer played a final at Wimbledon in 2008, which many consider the greatest match ever. I was just a fan watching it, and through all the rain delays, and here comes the dark. It was like Shakespearean or something. All the elements that were coming into play, watching these two guys go back and forth for 4 or 5 hours. And I've seen some other tennis matches too where it's been that kind of battle. I mean, I'm not going to bore you with tennis, but we're in a golden age on the men's tennis side. I mean, you see how these guys have pushed each other to new limits in the sport. To be a fan and watch that is as amazing as it gets for me. And I will say the skating one was top 5 too. So, yes, sir, way in the back.
I'm sure you've never been asked this question before. Your favorite Lee Corso story?
Favorite Lee Corso story. Well, Mr. Corso, if he were here, it would be almost his bedtime. I mean, people don't believe that Mr. Corso has excellent energy, and his passion for the sport and the show continues to be a huge part of it. But he likes to get his beauty sleep. I mean, if I were to tell you that most of the time when Herb Stewart and I are coming back from the office to possibly change and go out to dinner on a Friday night, he is already in his PJs. They're very cute PJs too. They got blue pajamas with the white piping. And what his routine is, he will take everything he can carry in his briefcase away from the catering table when he goes back to his hotel room on Friday to save the company room service money. He was very fiscally responsible. A show that makes, I won't tell you, but it makes tens of millions in Disney, which makes $1 billion, and ESPN, which is a big part of Disney's earnings. But Lee Corso was so concerned about not valet parking his car or that outrageous room service delivery charge. We have got to draw the line somewhere. So he takes food back to the room, and he has a meal where he drinks some Diet Coke, might get a bucket of chicken at the supermarket, and he'll have the guy go in and get a chicken, so again, to avoid that room service fee. And he'll go back and he'll work in the show, smoke a cigar, practice in the mirror again and again and again and again and again, and then have a little cap of NyQuil to knock himself out so he can get his beauty rest. So that's Lee Corso's weekly routine. That's what he will do tomorrow night in Athens, Georgia, I promise you. So I don't know if that's a favorite story, but I mean, that goes to show you. I mean, sometime maybe he'll come speak to you and he can talk about his great tales of the pranks that he did when he was a coach, because he invented the Crazy Coaches show. And that got himself on the radar. That's really how he ended up being with us, and we are privileged to have him alongside. It was Lee Corso and Beano Cook were the original guys on game day when I started doing it. And I wasn't even the host of game day, and I got called up. And this would show you what a big heart Lee has, because I got a phone call. It might have been on a Friday morning or a Thursday night, and said, Bob Carpenter, who hosted the show at that time, his wife's going to have a baby. Get here. Opportunity is knocking. You're going to host game day. Well, I haven't done much live TV. I mean, I'd never done game day. So I run in there for the meeting on Friday. Lee's being a coach, supportive, Beano took another approach. The late, great Mr. Cook, who is what was eventually a mentor for me, but was not the kind of mentor who would put his arm around you and comfort you and let you know that he was there for you, that whatever you didn't know yet, we're going to help you through. So we're sitting around, 30 of us around the table, that game day meeting, and I'm just trying to take it all in and figure out how am I going to do this show. We don't have a prompter or a script. It's formatted, but it's very loose. And we kind of there's a lot of winging it and a lot of rearranging the format once you're in it, if it didn't show. But there I am trying to keep my head above water, and it's paddling through the class 5 rapids of this meeting, trying to figure out what we're going to do. And Beano looks over and, oh, you got to be shitting your pants right now. I mean, really. You're not going to sleep at all tonight. Good luck. Thanks, Beano. As I said, there were different choices when you take on the role of mentor. There are different ways to play it. Beano had his way. We later became great friends, and I learned a ton from him, including that week. We got through it okay without any adult diapers being needed, but it was very memorable. And what I think of that time was the gentle hand of Mr. Corso to balance out the crustiness of Beano and get me through that. And he's been doing that. He's been doing it ever since. Yes, sir. Way in the back. White shirt. Okay. Yes, sir. Go Mountaineers! Yeah, you did. No, you know what? I wish game day had gotten to Boone. I don't know if it's too late. Hopefully we'll get up there at some point. I mean, the three-peat that North Dakota State's trying to match this year, I will tell you that App State was very much on the radar screen. It didn't work out to get game day there because they didn't have a home game the same week that there was a gap in the FBS schedule the way there was last week that let us go up there. So, I'm a big believer in that. And Mr. Pollack said something sarcastically on the show last week. How weird is it? How weird that they can compete for championships in a playoff and still somehow stumble to class and handle their business as students. That's impossible. That's weird. Because I think we all know that the obstacles to a playoff have not really been about that. That's a legitimate concern. I mean, we got to get players to go to class and take that part of it seriously, obviously, and do a much better job of that. But the reasons why they haven't been a playoff are not because of the academic calendar. So I'm a big believer in it. Now, a 20-team bracket, yeah, I mean, that's tough. I think I'll be curious to see how a 4-team playoff works. I think an 8-team bracket in 1A is probably the ideal size. I would probably do some things like maybe consider eliminating the conference championship games or that one extra game, because you'd be asking players to play 3 games beyond the 12 and then the 13th game. But you could also cut it back to maybe 11 regular season games, but because there'd be so much money involved, you might get schools to actually forfeit a couple of bucks in the regular season because the pot of gold, I mean, ESPN funds the sport. So the pot of gold is significant with a 4-team playoff, would be bigger with an 8-team playoff. But I'm a fan of it. I can't. It's still going to be sloppy and messy because the sport, by definition, by its nature, is sloppy and messy and controversial, and that's all part of the fun. So the debate that's going to happen next year, obviously, will be who's the 5th place team and the 6th place team, who got left out, who got screwed, and this committee that will meet, and I think it'll be an improvement over the computers and the polls. How can you have coaches vote in a poll that determines who's going to play in a championship game? I mean, you have a conflict of interest. Coaches vote when their team could be in contention or their rival could be in contention or their conference could be in contention, and teams share in conference BCS bowl money. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. So I think the system and the process for selecting the teams will be a lot better in a playoff, but it's still going to be sloppy, messy. We'll be talking about it. And then the seedings within those 4 teams. Like, how would you seed the teams this year? Right now, if you go by the polls and the mock playoffs, you have Bama playing Ohio State, and you have Clemson playing Oregon. Well, who's to say Ohio State should be ahead of Clemson? Clemson beat Georgia. Who was Ohio State beat? I mean, is that on reputation? Is it on we think they might get there because their schedule's easier? I mean, obviously you're going to have a lot more football to go on at the end of a season than just a month, but those are the same kind of conversations you're going to have. And whether Clemson is better than Ohio State is going to dictate whether they play Alabama in a semifinal next season. Not that Oregon's any easier, but those kinds of controversies will make it fun, and will keep shows like ours in business. But yes, a long way of saying I applaud the playoff, and I think it's going to be great for the sport. Yes, sir.
Do you think there's a legitimate chance that the super conferences will break away?
Yeah, I do. I do think there's a very good chance the conferences will break away, whether or not the stipend or the play for pay is the breakaway issue, which I think potentially it is. Or it's the playoff money. It may not necessarily be great for the programs that will be left out, but it's hard to argue that athletic departments like Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson and many others that are at the upper echelon have much in common with some of the fledgling 1A programs or MAC teams or so on. So, I mean, they have very different goals. They have very different financial realms that they operate in. So I think there is potential for a breakaway. I hope that that football at all levels would continue to flourish and thrive if that happens. But we can't foresee the future. I think that the conference shuffling is just about done in terms of they haven't officially begun to play in their leagues yet, Maryland and Rutgers, et cetera. But I think that the basic movement is sort of commissioners tell me, people more in the know than I am tell me that they think it's kind of sorted out. So we'll see, but there seems to be a differentiation with those 5 conferences and then the rest of the group. This is a hard-hitting group. These are intelligent questions. We've tackled the issues of our time. So, yes, sir.
Do you think Miami will ever hear back from the NCAA?
Will Miami ever hear back from the NCAA? Ever's a long time, but they've been waiting a long time. Boy, the NCAA is a mess right now. I do think it was another issue this week, and this is a little bit controversial. I guess it depends upon your outlook on cases like Miami and other cases. But I think the NCAA is so, can I say neutered right now? Spayed and neutered, both. I think that the power to enforce, to investigate, first of all, they've lost so many quality investigators. The investigative staff is a shell of what it was. It is nowhere near what it needs to be to properly police the voluminous rule book, which is too voluminous. But you got all these stories being broken by the media and you can get sources to talk to the media, like the Oklahoma State case and the case involving these players who had allegedly dealings with agents, the SEC players, former players, which there's a lot of documentation on, by the way. You know, the media breaks that story, not the investigators. The media is the one that gets the tips, and the media has the resources and the time, and the NCAA spends their time chasing around and trying to figure out, without subpoena power, who are we going to sit down, who are we going to get to talk to us. Miami is going to get, I think, off lighter than people thought initially. They may get off with some time served and then some other penalties. Penn State had some scholarships given back to it this week by the NCAA, 5 beginning next year, and they'll begin to dial back the punishments imposed on them, which were very severe and a result of some awful things that had nothing to do with NCAA rules violations. So many feel the NCAA overstepped in that case just a bit, regardless of what we think of the horrors up there. Did the NCAA have the right to do that? Many are now saying, well, they kind of did some Wild West sheriff justice there, and they may now have to pull back. And I think that's sort of the way the wind is blowing. It's very tough for the NCAA to hammer anybody right now because they're on such thin ice. Yes, sir. Ohio State, Wisconsin, because there's so many people in this room that are going to be locked into that game. No, I think, no, Buckeyes are everywhere. I must have talked to 5 Buckeyes earlier at some events before this, so I know that there is global support for both those programs. Want to see if Wisconsin's for real. You know, I think it's a tough test. To go into Columbus, it'll be a slugfest. Braxton Miller is fine. He's going to be back. They'll use their other quarterback who's played so well, Kenny Guyton, when Miller's been hurt. They'll bring him in as well. Wisconsin has a new coach with the same personality, great running game. Gordon is a sensational running back. I think I'd say Ohio State narrow if I had to make a pick, but I think it's one of those ones where you're going to have about 2 or 3 TVs in prime time this week because there's actually a good number of games, and that one happens to be on ABC. We'd have been there if Wisconsin hadn't been robbed at Arizona State, by the way. If you Badger fans in here, you have a right to be bitter. Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't know about the NCAA men's basketball tournament, to answer your question, or the women's tournament for that matter. I mean, that's kind of out of my realm. The nature of the tournament is so different from what a college football playoff is. The beauty of it, I think, is the Cinderellas and the teams like Florida Gulf Coast and all that stuff. I think that it would be a shame to limit the opportunities for that kind of story. In fact, that's the problem I have with the 4-team and even the 8-team playoff, is that you'd like to have the opportunity for the Cinderella story. If there were a 4-team playoff this year, I'm not even sure an undefeated Louisville team would get in there. Now, their schedule is partly their own doing and partly not their fault with the way the conference is, and they're in flux, obviously. But an 8-team playoff, they surely would be. And you'd have teams that have tackled tougher schedules, lost a couple games, yet they can still play for a championship. That's what I think is good about the NCAA basketball tournament, and that you've got the opportunity to stumble and schedule tough and do what's right for the players and the fans, because we all want to see good matchups, and you can still compete for a championship. I'm not of the belief, by the way, that a college football playoff would make the regular season any less meaningful. I think it'd make it more meaningful. Any one game, the importance of any one game, make or break, yeah, that could be reduced. But that's only one way of defining the importance of the regular season. You come down the line, and you got a bunch of teams that are battling for seeding, or maybe they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If a few things happen, if they really look good at the end, could get in. You've now got a lot more games in the regular season that are meaningful, rather than just Alabama against somebody in Atlanta and one opponent who's next on the list. And if they don't stumble, the matchup is obvious. Everybody else is out. The beauty of the basketball tournament is you have those Cinderella stories. I don't think a 4-team playoff we're going to really see that, but maybe down the line, when or if the bracket gets bigger, we'd have that chance. Yes, sir. Who's going to win the Heisman? First of all, I wouldn't tell you if I knew. If I had the answer right here, I couldn't tell you, because the host of the show, I don't ever reveal my vote, not until well after the fact. And I think that nobody ever wins the Heisman in September. Boy, people look foolish in my line of work giving the Heisman to somebody. Because, I mean, Geno Smith would have won it last year. I mean, every year we joke about the September Heisman. I think that, it's a quarterback award right now. I'd be surprised if a quarterback didn't win it, because you're going to have a number of guys with monster stats. And I think if you look at the guys, they're going to be on teams. They're going to be in the mix right till the end. But I'm not going to guess on that now. I'll be right there in New York, and that's one of my favorite hours of the year. It's one of those things I get to do where I feel very privileged since 1994 to be there and do the first interview with the Heisman guy. And now they come back and they're all these retired Hall of Famers, and they get to stand there and be a part of it. So I got no idea, but I'll have a smile on my face and give him a handshake, whoever it is. Yes, sir. Favorite college football player? God, it's a tough question. People ask me the best, and I go back a ways. So I always say, because I firmly believe that I don't know if I'll see a better college football player than Barry Sanders was when he played at Oklahoma State in the late 80s. I mean, he was 2,600 yards in an 11-game season. I mean, he did some things, broke some records we're not going to see touched. And he was a kid who was this anonymous little punt returner for Oklahoma State, playing the old alma mater Buffaloes when he took a punt back. And who the hell is that kid? Because he's playing behind Thurman Thomas at the time. And then obviously he goes out the next year and has that monster year. So, I mean, for me, Barry Sanders will always be the greatest player I've seen. Hugh Green, I think, would be the greatest defensive player, and certainly one of the top 5 players as well. But, the funny thing is I've had a lot of guys but back before they called me Mr. Fowler, which is a sign more of age than respect, before they remember watching game day as like a 4-year-old with their dad. We used to hang out with players a lot more. It was also, again, the pre-cell phone camera days. And the funny thing is there are coaches now, respectable coaches, who go up and stand at podiums like this and represent their programs, who I remember partying with, hanging out with when I was a young guy, and they were players in college. And it's so funny to see that. So, I mean, I have very good memories of kind of like being able to socialize with players back then, and as a young guy myself, and those days are sort of over. It's a very different relationship you have now with players, but I mean, guys like right now, I mean, what I said about Manziel, I guess that's their way of playing me off here. You're going to have to find your way out of here in the dark. There we go. Let there be light. I love watching Manziel play. I'd watch A&M anywhere, anytime, against anybody, because it's electric when he's on the field. And that's, we're there to be entertained. And he entertained the world. That Alabama game drew a massive rating for an afternoon game. It did a 9 for CBS. That's freaking amazing. And I think a lot of people just want to watch that kind of a dynamic player. Again, every time you turn up, you might see something you'll never see again. So I respect a good 9-6 football game, but I love the guys who can provide, the highlight reels as well. Yes, sir, way in the back. Is Ralphie the Buffalo the best entrance? I think he's the best live animal mascot. I mean, I think that the team behind the mascot is really important too. So the Buffaloes haven't been nearly as imposing or intimidating in recent years. I mean, Ralphie's a lot cooler when the team behind it is ranked in the top 5. So maybe we'll get back to Boulder for game day one of these years. We were there in the early years of the show, but I did pull a groin trying to run behind Ralphie one time when I was a sideline reporter. So I'm not embarrassed to admit that. The Harley that Oregon comes out behind is pretty cool too. It's very random. They have a dude in a Harley who, as far as I know, he's not even a graduate of Oregon, but he shows up with his Harley hog and he leads the team out, and they've always done it. And he always comes to game day. So I mean, it's so random that appeals to the weird sense of humor in me. But I think it's 1:30, and they brought the lights up for a reason. But I want to thank you, first of all, the hardcores, for staying right till the end. I appreciate that. I had a great time before the event, getting to know Jay's group and also the Electrolux group. I mean, the sponsorship of this is so important. I meant what I said to John and the group that's been doing this for a long, long time. Congratulations on the growth of this club, and a salute from me and my whole group at ESPN for what you guys continue to do to support youth athletics. So I hope down the line we get back to Charlotte. I hope I have a few more good stories to think about when I come back to North Carolina in the future. I had a great time today. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.